Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we get into the source material you've provided, try and, pull out some surprising facts and maybe some valuable insights. Today, we're tackling something that's causing a lot of conversation and honestly some confusion. Masculinity, especially when we talk about it in Muslim communities.
That's right. And it's tough navigating identity these days, isn't it? The world feels so polarized. Our sources today, we've got stuff from the Yakin Institute, Traversing Tradition, the Muslim Vibe, that really highlight how these talks about what it means to be a man can get tangled up with culture, politics, even colonial history.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive then is to sort of unpack this idea of toxic masculinity. We want to look at what the sources say it really means and then hold that up against, well, authentic Islamic masculinity. Prophetic masculinity like we see in the Sunnah and early Islamic history. We really want to help you cut through the noise, understand the nuances here, find some clarity. All right, let's set the scene a bit. Our sources are pretty clear that, especially in the US, there's no real consensus anymore on what being a man means. You've got these ideals, right? Like the progressive male, maybe more sensitive, intellectual, involved at home. And then that's contrasted with the traditional man's man, the archetype focused on knowing right from wrong. And what's kind of striking is how some young Muslim men, faced with all this, are looking towards figures like, say, Jordan Peterson, or even aligning with alt-right ideas or men's rights groups.
Yeah. And what's fascinating is how that outside polarization filters into Muslim communities. Dr. Jonathan Brown, in his open letter, he talks about this thing he calls the sellout versus real axis. Basically, any idea that sounds a bit liberal or Western gets labeled sellout, while anything that looks traditional or from the Islamic past is seen as authentic or real automatically.
Wow, that sellout versus real axis. It sounds incredibly limiting. Like if a scholar says, I don't know, there shouldn't be a partition in the mosque.
Exactly. To one group, they're a liberal sellout. To another, they're an enlightened hero.
It just shuts down conversation, doesn't it?
Totally. And it creates this huge problem because, what's Islamically right or wrong doesn't always fit on those axes. Not everything authentically Islamic is traditional or conservative in today's terms. And crucially, wisdom isn't only found in Islamic tradition. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, "A wise word is the lost animal of the believer."
Wherever he finds it, he has the right to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So think about slavery abolition. It mostly came out of the Christian West, but Muslims generally adopted it because it fits with the Quran and Sunnah's push for freeing people.
That's a really good point. And it also feels like some cultural stuff gets mistaken for Islamic rules. Like the sources mention young Muslim guys in the West growing up thinking a real man dominates women, maybe because their sisters always cleaned up after them in their immigrant households. But the sources are clear that specific traditional man's man isn't inherently Islamic. Like Sunni law schools generally say wives don't have to cook or clean, or it depends on culture. Okay, so we've got these cultural ideas that aren't really Islamic. Let's dig into what the sources are calling toxic masculinity. What are the key traits they point out?
Well, the articles highlight a few really harmful things. One big one is this inability or refusal to show emotion. The whole men don't cry thing or feel sad or even show too much joy. Traversing Tradition says this denial of emotion doesn't just hurt the person, it damages relationships. And tragically, it can spill over into violence, especially against women. The stats are pretty grim. One study found an intimate partner killed 45% of murdered American women, and domestic abusers carried out over half of U.S. mass shootings.
Wow, that's a stark connection. Not just emotional harm, but real physical violence. What else? What other traits define this?
Another big one is this idea that men sort of have dominion over women's bodies. Now, Islam asks both men and women to be modest, lower their gaze, right?
Yeah.
But toxic masculinity tends to put all the focus on women's perceived faults. And this just enables sexualization, objectification, contributes to things like sexual assault. The Muslim Vibe article makes an interesting point, too. It suggests some modern Western feminism, by promoting open sexuality as liberation, can ironically lead to women being shaped by misogynistic views, where their looks overshadow their achievements, like their degrees.
So it's tangled. It affects how men act, but also how women are seen and valued. How does this stuff spread, especially, within the Ummah?
The internet is huge, obviously. Sources point to red pill communities, incel groups. These places are just full of toxic masculinity. And Muslim men who get exposed to this might start picking up ideas about masculinity and femininity from these like modern, westernized, often distorted standards instead of Islamic ones. It gets really concerning when you see some Muslim men aligning with alt-right figures who are often openly racist or Islamophobic. It's a massive contradiction.
Yeah, it really feels like a core message from all these sources is these toxic ideas. They're an insult to actual Islamic masculinity. And often they aren't even originally Islamic, but maybe leftovers from colonialism. How does that work?
That's a key point. Think about English common law, which shaped legal systems in lots of colonized Muslim countries. Under that system, a married woman wasn't really seen as a separate legal person. Her property just became her husband's. Islamically, totally different. A woman's property rights were always independent. Even something like honor killings, which Islam absolutely does not sanction the way they were treated legally, was sometimes influenced by imported British laws, giving lighter sentences in places like the Indian subcontinent. So external laws kind of warped things.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting, I think. The sources don't just diagnose the problem, they point to the solution. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as the goodly example. How does his sunnah, his life and teachings, give us a model for authentic masculinity?
Well, his behavior is just such a stark contrast to so many of these toxic or even just common traditional male attitudes. His wife, Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, described him mending his own clothes, milking his own sheep, basically serving himself. She famously said he was in the service of his family. Think about that, helping his wives with meals. And when his daughter Fatima complained, her hands were calloused from work and asked for help, like a servant. He basically advised her that praising God was better, almost like being served was an indulgence to avoid. That completely challenges the idea that a real man gets served by women.
That image is so powerful. The Prophet, peace be upon him, serving his family, not demanding service. It flips so many expectations. What about emotions? You mentioned toxic masculinity involves suppressing emotion.
Right. Islam actually emphasizes crying. Tears are called a mercy from Allah, something that can extinguish the fire of Allah's wrath.
Mm.
Even Umar, known for being incredibly strong and fearless, is described as having lines on his face from crying so much. And the Prophet himself, he was loving, affectionate, played with his grandkids, joked with his wives, completely different from that cold, distant, manly ideal.
So beyond his personal example, what about the wider community, the men and women around him? What was that dynamic like?
It's really fascinating when you look at the sources. Yes, there were distinct duties, prayer, fasting, dress code differences, men having that Qiyamah role of protecting and providing. But beyond that, surprisingly little difference in their general conduct. Both men and women were deeply pious. They were decisive, courageous, humble, but confident, totally submitted to God, and really active in public life.
Really active in public life. And you give some examples that counters a lot of stereotypes.
Absolutely. Aisha became a major political figure, a huge source of knowledge. Salama, another wife, once asked if she should join a public address, basically asking, aren't we part of the people too? Expecting to be included. During Caliph Umar's time, a woman corrected him in the middle of his sermon, and he just admitted she was right, saying the woman is right and Umar is wrong. And women fought in battles. Nu'ayb bin Ka'b defended the Prophet with a sword at Uhud. Afiyah bin Abd al-Muttalib killed an enemy soldier at the Battle of the Trench, but then insisted a male companion take his armor because she wouldn't touch an unrelated man. Shows both courage and piety. So no, the legacy wasn't these traditional man's men and quiet women. It was courageous, committed, humble people, men and women engaged in their society.
Okay, so bringing this all back to today for you listening, how do we get from this crisis of manliness towards something more aligned with these Islamic principles?
The Muslim Vibe article makes this really important distinction between dhukur, just biological males, and rijal, which means true men. Rijal are those who put things in their proper places, act with wisdom, responsibility. Unlike dhukur, who might not, even if they're adults. So true manliness, rujula, isn't about being harsh or reckless. It's chivalry, responsibility for yourself and family, and gaira.
Gaira. Okay, so that's not toxic masculinity, because sometimes it gets painted that way, like possessiveness.
No, not according to these sources. They define it as courage ashaja. It's about struggling against your own fear, to stand up for what's right, even if it's unpopular. It's not about flying off the handle. It's courage within limits, within Islamic law. The examples given are like the Prophet's steadfastness in Makkah, Ali's bravery protecting the Prophet, a companion sacrificing himself to defend a woman whose hijab was pulled off. That's courage, true protection.
So practically speaking, what do the sources suggest for fostering this authentic arugula? What are the steps?
For men, it really starts with just acknowledging that toxic masculinity is a real thing. and committing to working on yourself. That means looking critically at harmful societal norms, challenging stuff you might have just absorbed. The sources talk about a proper upbringing, tarbiyah, based on arujula al-futuwa, that's like chivalry, generosity, raising boys with good manners, adab, courage, training them to defend themselves in the community, martial arts, archery, firearms training even mentioned. But it's also about exposure to hardship, toughening up responsibly. It's really a call for men to own up to imbalances and, as one source put it, clean their side of the street.
And what about women? How do the sources see their role in this shift?
For women, the advice is basically be strong, be fierce, be bold, stick together, educate each other, learn, uplift, heal. Modesty, like hijab, can actually be a form of protest against toxic masculinity, not just about protection. The responsibility for objectification is always on the one doing it. Islam encourages education for everyone. Remember, Fatima al-Fihri founded the first university, and Islam gave women divorce rights 1,400 years ago, empowering them to leave unhealthy situations. The goal is a community where women are seen as fully human, their choices respected, and everyone fulfills their responsibilities to maintain balance and peace. So, wrapping this up, it's pretty clear from the sources that real Islamic masculinity isn't toxic or oppressive at all. It's rooted right there in the Prophet's Sunnah service. Emotional depth, respect, courageous protection. It's about being a rajul, a true man taking responsibility, supporting family, standing for justice. Not just a dakar, a male who might just go along with harmful norms.
Yeah, and this isn't just some academic exercise, is it? It really hits home how we live, raise our kids, build our communities. It feels like a call to action, really, for Muslim men to embody that prophetic example, and for all of us to see that true strength is in humility, in service, in treating each other with dignity.
Exactly. And maybe that leaves you, our listener, with something to think about. How can we, in our own lives and communities start untangling these cultural habits that get mixed up with religion? And how can we actively push for masculinity and actually a whole society that better reflects the balance, the compassion, the justice that Islam teaches?